the
It's
message?
hard though, because I'm like a blue sky thinker. I'm 10 years ahead of kind of where like, and I like big impact. I like things to be quite, yeah, big and
Bosh.
grand and yeah, because it's like that adrenaline exciting kind of aspect of it. But I've realized that that's not, but then also sometimes you're trying to tackle things that are way too big. So I'm not really the details orientated person. And so that is a balance because execution is more important than the planning anyway. And so if you can kind of get that balance between always having that blue sky thinking of where we're going to, but then actually trying to break it down into kind of little achievable steps, then that's where the progress comes from. That's where the flywheel and the momentum comes from. But having those, that's a paradox in itself, and that leads into kind of any conversations we want to have around leadership and what that looks like. And because you have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable and the unknown while still, because that's over here, while still dealing with what's going on day to day and what's working and not losing momentum on that.
Well done. You have finally discovered the most important health podcast you will ever need as a medical professional. The conversations you are about to hear are guaranteed to change your clinical practice and hopefully transform you into a better conversationalist. They could even make you better crack at parties. Welcome to Teacup, where swearing is guaranteed.
Nick G in the house.
Step up from Ali G.
Yeah.
Actually, my son is called Ali, so we do have an Ali G in the house.
In the Ali G in the house. That is amazing. I couldn't have planned that better. Brilliant. Well, thanks, Nick, for coming on the podcast, which I've kind of labeled as therapy or challenging therapy culture. And I think if people really want to know more details about you, because it's worth a very, very interesting story, especially about switching careers, the mix between physio and entrepreneurship, coaching, I would check out Life Stories by Andy Thomas, because you've got a great interview on there. And I don't want to have to repeat any of that because Andy did a good job there. So I would just get you to describe yourself and your career maybe in 3 words.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me on and to have this conversation. 3 words, that's hard. So I'm going to say varied, because I've jumped around a lot of different roles. Like longest until I owned my own business was probably staying in a job for kind of 18 months, 2 years maximum. Global. I've worked UK, been out on kind of training camps in Kenya, and I worked in New Zealand. And then my kind of learning has taken me through like MBA to San Francisco and different places. And the last one I'm going to say, which kind of sums up everything, is curiosity. So I'm always, I used to be called Nosy Nick when I was growing up, and I think that's kind of carried through. So yeah, those are my 3 words: varied, global, and curiosity.
Yeah. Andy Hosgood would be absolutely buzzing when he hears this. That's his favorite word, I reckon. Curiosity. No, it is a great word though, isn't it? It just invites that ability to be open-minded and always kind of look for that new thing that can improve where we're going. So that's going to be a real good foundation for the chat. Then what I could do with everyone else is ask you 10 quick-fire questions. So it's one or the other.
Okay.
These are so hard. Coaching or mentoring?
Coaching.
Entrepreneur or therapist?
Entrepreneur.
Dancing or chatting?
Dancing.
Nice. Gin and tonic or herbal tea?
Oh, nowadays it's a herbal tea.
Oh, it's so boring. Cardio or strength?
Strength.
Swearing or not swearing?
Not swearing.
Oh, boo. So I'll have to adjust my next 15 minutes. Oh, gin and tonic's not swearing. Okay, cool. At the end of the podcast, thanks everybody for coming. I probably know the answer to this based on what you said already. So night in or night out?
Love a night out, just can't do them.
Yeah, fair play, fair play. South of Europe or South America?
South Europe.
Negative reinforcement or positive reinforcement?
Positive reinforcement.
And then champagne or Prosecco?
Champagne. Well, actually, English sparkling every day, but champagne.
Lovely job. Perfect. Now everybody knows who you are with the 3 words. And then the next thing is, and the last thing I'll ask you kind of from a fun point of view is, if you were to describe yourself, you said the 3 words, but if you were to put it into like music terms, so you as a person, therapist, entrepreneur, whatever you want to do, would there be a song or a genre or a band that would describe you or your approach?
So this is like my hardest question that I had on your list, because my music taste is so eclectic. I love music, and I love all types of music. But this is this is a real confession. One of my favorite songs ever is Michelle Pfeiffer in Grease 2, and it's a song called Cool Rider. And if you've never heard it, go and check it out. But
very niche.
It is one of my
Michelle Pfeiffer, the actress.
Yes, yeah.
So random.
She sings a song called Cool Rider, and it is like any of my friends who know me, it's probably my soundtrack song.
And why is that, do you think? What is that in that song that it describes you, or why is it that?
It's to do with pushing boundaries and being a bit it's not like, so my nicknames were Nosy Nick and Naughty Nick when I was growing up. So it's about pushing boundaries, doing things a bit differently, finding the edge in things, and probably adrenaline seeking. I do love a motorbike, a fast car, or a fast boat.
And do you think that transfers then into the type of person you are when it comes to making decisions?
There's probably 2 sides of that. Historically, I've probably rushed things and probably done emotive kind of decisions and not thought through. And that is because I like action. I like things to move forward. I like dynamic environments. I like fast paced. So I'm aligned to that. But over the years, I've become much more strategic in what that looks like, and much more focused, and not saying yes to everything and checking it aligned. So there's a balance there, I think, for me. But I am aligned to kind of fast-paced, dynamic environments. That's why I like working with startups and scale-ups.
Yeah, and I think like there's probably going to be spectrums of people who like to take risk or like that type of approach, and then there's kind of, there'll be extreme versions of that and less extreme versions of that. We'll sit somewhere, everyone's going to sit on their comfortable nature with risk. But it's quite a common theme, isn't it? People who, they have to go out there and make those mistakes and then recover for them. Like you said, you've got this, you're starting to approach a balance, but you kind of nearly have like this is about challenging healthcare, right? And as a profession, this is my opinion on, we can be a bit safe, we don't want to push people. Like let me explain even more. Patients come in pain, and our main goal usually is to get that pain away, or to certainly help it. That's one of the number one things that people want and that we want to get to. One of the problems I often get with physios who come to speak to me is, I want to get good at end stage return to sport. That's one of the number one things people say to me, right? And I'll go, okay, fine. The problem when you look at the research is physios are afraid of breaking people because they've just helped them get out of that pain scenario. So they were in pain. Now they're not in pain. And then we kind of have to push them in return to sport. That's the problem. And there's this kind of maybe risk of, I don't want to do that. So a lot of physios will go, let's just see how you go. See you later. I don't want to be the one who breaks you. So see you later and go somewhere else kind of thing. And I think that might carry over. Again, it's an opinion. So just want to throw that out there, is that pushes into our risk averse, or maybe making decisions about maybe going out in private practice or pushing ourselves in that realm of, unknown. And I just want to know how important that is, or how would you encourage someone listening going, I really want that, but I'm a bit scared? You're obviously kind of naturally like that. Do you think there's any way you can develop that or find a way of improving that?
So I think there's two aspects there. One that I've come to from more kind of like a technical piece, and one maybe more from a mindset, cultural kind of piece. I think the like as people may or may not know, I am a physio by background. Like sport really heavily focused in my life. But also when it came to kind of business, I bought a physio business and we set up strength and conditioning, like CrossFit style facility at the same time. This was back in 2013. And even as kind of quite an experienced physio at that point, just under 10 years kind of qualified, I'd never come across like Olympic lift movements. I'd never kind of trained. I'd done sport all my life, but I'd never trained to that kind of level of S&C. So even though that was a failed business, relationships and aspect, the bit I learned, it was the fittest I ever was in my life. And it really gave me appreciation for athletes and strength and conditioning training and understanding what that looks like. So I think there is a part of experiential learning that we really probably forget about, rather than the theory and going on courses and understanding what's happening, experiencing it yourself. And that could be a real spectrum. So having an injury yourself, having had, like, being a postnatal mum and therefore understanding what pregnancy. So when I'm talking to kind of pelvic health clients, I had just a different layer and perspective on what people were going through. So naturally, obviously, physios are hugely empathetic people, but actually having gone through something yourself and understanding it from what it actually feels like and what the emotion feels like, what the body feels like, that really can't be underestimated. And obviously everyone's experiences are completely different and you're never going to experience it exactly like someone else does. But I really think, regardless of if you've got an interest in S&C or end stage rehab, you actually need to go and physically do it yourself and take the action and go through those exercise programs and go through what you're asking someone to do, to know that you've got then the confidence to prescribe it or to take someone to that end stage. So I think there's like a technical piece that if you don't actually do it, you can't talk about it anyway. And then from kind of a culture mindset perspective, the most frustrated I've ever been in my life, or when I've really struggled with aspects, is because I'm thinking about something, but I'm not actually doing it. So a lot of thought may go into it, but unless you actually go and do it and experience it, you just don't know what the outcome will be. And I think this links to this conversation around failure. I haven't got an issue with failure, because failure is a learning experience. I've got an issue when action doesn't happen, because you haven't then tried to do something and therefore you don't even know if you're going to fail at it. So it's like a whole circular aspect for me, that the talking is one thing, the theory is one thing, the understanding is great, but the action and the experiential side of it is really the biggest learning that has happened. And that's probably why I keep, in some ways, jumping around and finding variety in my career, is because I need to experience things. I can't be told. I never did like antenatal classes or NCT or anything like that, becoming a mum, because I was like, well, it'd be great and I can hear it, but I just know I won't take any of it in, because I need to actually go and have a baby and have to look after it and things. And that relates to probably every aspect of my life. I just need to do it, and then I will learn so much more, whether it was a positive experience or a negative experience. I don't really believe in kind of failure in that term. I've just learned something that I can then iterate on going forward, and have that experience as part of it, rather than talking or thinking about it.
Yeah, I think as well, what's just to take up on your point there, is like, I often will have a conversation around empathy, and it's a word that's thrown around there a lot, again, of, oh yeah, the empathy for person's problem. But like what you mentioned there, is it's next level if you want empathy, where you've experienced it, because you can't, if someone's experienced, like anything I've been through, like you said about even being a parent, sleep deprivation, I've been in a car accident where I've been, knocked out my teeth and all of those things. When someone starts talking like that, or even grief, losing somebody, etc. And you can't hide the body language and the facial expression and the kind of tone of your voice when you're connected with somebody through a proper, empathy, that understanding. If an athlete comes in or somebody who, and they're talking about a really hard rehab and you've been through that. And I'm saying you have to be an athlete or you have to be through all these things, but that next level empathy happens when you've experienced it. And you can get better at maybe putting yourself in someone's shoes, but where possible, I think is probably what you're saying, is try and get that experience, especially if you're going to work in that area. Now, obviously, getting pregnant is a difficult one for me. But what I can do though is, certainly I've experienced it. I've certainly gone through that, what the situation is like, and I've listened to somebody who's been through it. So at least I can be in that situation where I can at least understand the situation and get that point across again. So it's just again, it's not going to be perfect, but that experience is going to be something. And so I think that's hopefully something that people don't really think about. There's empathy everywhere that you can learn from, which will then affect your communication style or skill, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think part of that is then, like what you were talking about, you may not be able to experience it yourself, but can you go talk to someone else who has? Like what different, it comes into kind of conversations and perspectives and making sure you don't have like either an echo chamber or a narrow perspective. You try to get as much diversity of thought into an experience or an area of interest so that you can see it from different perspectives. And I think that that's the other aspect that is featured really heavily when I say varied, is I've had experiences where I can just communicate, or had experiences where I've had to communicate with so many different types of people from different backgrounds, in different roles, responsibilities, coming at it from different perspectives. So you've got this whole piece around like stakeholder management and what that looks like, and how you try to marry up different people's perspectives and come to negotiate some form of goal going forward. And if you think that's what we do with patients all the time, like and athletes, you're trying to change behavior, you're trying to get them on board with a program, you're trying to you're giving them advice as to what you think they should do, but you've got to then iterate it for what their environment is, what their training program is, what their lifestyle is, where they're going to be, what access they've got to equipment, all these things. And therefore you can't be rigid in your thought process. You have to be adaptable to what is in front of you, knowing what the ultimate goal is, but knowing that there's challenges and barriers to it, and how are you going to overcome them. So it becomes a really collaborative coaching experience that requires a really, really heavy and thought through level of communication.
Yeah. I just on that point is that's what I call bamboo therapist or a bamboo therapy. It's just that flexible ability to kind of adapt, adjust. You can have the best program all laid out for your patient, and they come in and they throw a curveball, like they've been unwell for 2-3 weeks. They have something else happens, and you could be a bit like, oh God, right, well, I have all this planned. Right, well, I can't really do very much now. And it's like, actually, on the contrary, it's an area where you can understand, you can maybe help them with that current stress, which is now more important than the thing that they were originally here for, which is a thing that would build therapeutic relationship, which they might go, wow, that was really useful, even though I've not been able to do the thing they asked me to do, but they've now given me support in that situation. I remember in the past, certainly in the first 5 years, that would be so frustrating because I'm trying to get my head around the difficult, complex world of therapy. And then this person has now put a curveball in there and my brain can't deal with it because I'm like, okay, I'm so rigid because I'm trying to learn here. And that's the part of learning, isn't it? In those first few years, you're making your mistakes, you're failing, and that's part of it. But as soon as you can start to kind of realize that actually being flexible within the session is just like you said, and it's in all different areas. So yeah, I like that. What I wanted to ask you then is just with you as well. This kind of seems like a harsh question or a harsh statement, but what bores you about physiotherapy?
So I think this is really interesting, and I by nature get bored really, like I've got a very short attention span, and so I get bored of a lot of things very quickly. But it's not around physio. What I get bored with is That I find kind of a strong word, but it's maybe
Yeah.
more of this like mindset of um, things staying the same. It leads on to kind of what we've talked about. If someone can't see, so it's like a narrow mindset, I suppose, is what I would view it as. If you can't see how to regress something, progress something, do it in a different way, do it in a different environment, do it with a different spin on it, that doesn't bore me. It frustrates me, I suppose, because
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like it's that rigidity of thought process again, and it's the fact that there's only one, like as we know there's so many ways of doing everything, but it's like what is the outcome you're trying to achieve, and then you can work on there are then like hundreds of different ways of how to achieve it. But when you know, so if there is like an outcome that you're trying to achieve, but there's such a rigid tunnel or pathway to achieve it, that it's not a bore, I suppose. It's like a come on, open your mind. Like that's not the only way to do it. So that's a real like turn off for me in a conversation with someone or around something, when it's like a no, or I don't believe in the word no, really. It's like there'll be different ways of doing things. There's never a like a complete hard stop.
Yeah, and it's interesting you said, because when I wrote bore, it's an emotive word. I have frustrated and frustration written beside it, because that's what I kind of wanted to push you on. Then is what frustrates you about the therapy profession, healthcare profession, really, that's making you kind of like, where you think change is needed, why you think change might be needed, where and I suppose I don't want to ask too many questions at once. So let me start with that then, because there's another one to lay on from that. But yeah, what do you think that frustrates you the most about trying to drive that change and that progression?
Yeah, I think this is really interesting as well, because I have an issue with whole generalizations, but I also know that I have generalized in my career. Like I chose to leave the NHS and public healthcare systems because I was frustrated by bureaucracy and red tape and being told I couldn't do things, or we can't do that. Or we couldn't treat people the way that they needed to from a personalized kind of perspective. But that was my experience in the department I was working in the trust I was working in the geography I was working in. But I chose that to be then a generalization of I'm leaving public healthcare system because I wanted the autonomy to work privately. And as we know, there is good and bad and hugely varied private practice out there as well. So I'm going to take the perspective more of, or the kind of direction of more of, it's not, I think there's really this aspect of finding your tribe and surrounding yourself with people who think the same way that you do. Um, so it's not so much of a aspect of what does a whole system need to change, because we know that there are good and bad parts of all systems, and there's good and bad leaders in all businesses. And so it's more around, can you, when you find what works for you or that you value and aligns with you, how do you harness and how do you amplify that? Because we know we are the outcome of the closest five people. I like, this is another thing I never get right. I never get sayings right. I never get words of
I know what you mean,
songs
though.
right. But it's like you're amplified by what's around you, and so whatever that is that is positive.
Yeah.
Maybe it's around values or ethics or morals or development or ambition or whatever it is. How do you amplify that rather than and so that's where I suppose I come from, that kind of positive side of how do you get more of what's better. And actually I've now come to a point where some things I just can't influence. They're out of my sphere, and so I'm not going to put time and effort that direction. I'm going to go where I can get positivity and growth and development from.
Yeah, brilliant. There's loads of stuff there. Things I would say there. There's a couple of comments I just want to make on that, because great. It's a ripple effect, isn't it? It's like surround yourself by like-minded people who have the same goal, and what you would hope is like you put this pebble in that, and then that ripple will grow. You can only control those things, and you can have those discussions, and as long as those people have an open-minded approach to things, you can only do that, and then that would hopefully grow, and people would recognize that as useful, and then therefore hopefully adapt that. And that's the only thing you can do, rather than to try and change too much. And I think that's links into something recently that we're trying to in the NHL. So I do part-time NHS work. So, and one of the things we're trying to improve is shared decision making and collaborative approaches. And we were talking in a meeting, and there's some kickback sometimes on this type of training or communication training from therapists, or people thinking they've been doing it long enough so that they don't need to adapt on that. And that's interesting in itself. It can be frustrating, where you kind of nearly want to go and say, I don't agree with that, and you kind of think you should do this, but you can't force this stuff on people. And I said to the same approach as what you said there. I said, well, I tell you what, let's just work with the people who are really interested in it. It's got good evidence. We know it works. We believe in it. We think it's the best way. So why don't we just set up a small group? And if people attend that, and then if we get the same response, or if they get the same responses of I had from coaching, they'll get the same response. And then that will ripple away. And so it's a really nice thing if anyone's listening and wants to develop something, even within an NHS environment, whatever about private practice, just start a small group that are trying to do something positive, and you never know where that might get you. Is I suppose the message.
It's hard though, because I'm like a blue sky thinker. I'm 10 years ahead of kind of where and I like big impact. I like things to be quite big
Bosh.
and grand, and because it's like that adrenaline exciting kind of aspect of it. But I've realized that that's not, but then also sometimes you're trying to tackle things that are way too big. So I'm not really the details orientated person. And so that is a balance, because execution is more important than the planning anyway. And so if you can kind of get that balance between always having that blue sky thinking of where we're going to, but then actually trying to break it down into kind of little achievable steps, then that's where the progress comes from. That's where the flywheel and the momentum comes from. But having those, that's a paradox in itself, and that leads into kind of any conversations we want to have around leadership and what that looks like, and because you have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable and the unknown, while still, because that's over here, while still dealing with what's going on day to day and what's working, and not losing momentum on that. And this is a big learning that I'm going through at the moment with a particular startup, and it's a great philosophy that I'm quite excited about, around how do you when things are working, that's like business as usual, and that should be brilliantly working. So that's like optimization. But there's a whole load, especially around change management and growth or scaling or that is unknown. Like, you just don't know, and some people are really uncomfortable with that. Some people really need stability in their life, and they really need to know exactly how that will look, but that's not also the reality. And so actually sometimes I think it's not even around change, it's people being uncomfortable, people being comfortable with the uncomfortable, and trusting. It's not even really trusting a process to some degree, but it's the idea of iteration, experimentation. And the real challenge, if we kind of come to the crux of this, is working in healthcare. Experimentation is a challenge for people, because there's the aspects does that then become neglectful? Does that become litigation? Like, what does experimental really look like? But if we bring it down to kind of like MSK rehab or S&C, which is like areas we've both worked in, and you obviously specialize in, there's a big difference between experimenting and iterating on a program design compared to clinical neglect or clinical negligence that could lead to a big health issue. And so I think we do need to get comfortable with iterating on exercise and rehab and S&C that wouldn't be deemed as like negligence. Does that make sense? Like, do
Yeah.
you know where I'm getting to on that? And I think sometimes that's all bucketed into we can't do harm. And it's like, we're not
Yes.
going to do harm, but we don't know what is the right way
Yeah.
to adapt, to create a physiological adaptation that
Oh,
we're trying to achieve with
yeah,
someone.
I can't agree more with the, and I'll give you examples of this. Is I think from what you're saying is it drives me mad sometimes around orthopedic, post-operative orthopedic kind of protocols, or when they're a little bit like, though no, there's they kind of jump from, oh, you can do anything you want with this when they haven't moved their arm for 3 months. I'm not knocking orthopedics as such. I'm just saying that it's sometimes this weird kind of thing of, right, well, don't move in those first 3 months, because if that was to then be disturbed, there's a litigation thing about fracture healing, right? But after that, you know, I've had people come back from 3-4 months of not using their body to then being like, oh yeah, you can get back running, or you can get back jumping around a football pitch and stuff. And you're like going, hang on a second. Just because you're past the legal kind of bone healing stage because you've done surgery, this person is not prepared to be able to now run and do all these tasks. So it's a really weird one, because you're going from like, don't break somebody here, but after that, well, you were past your healing phase, so it must have been something else that caused it. And likewise with terms like gentle, or like, you know, get back and do it a little bit, or do it, and you're like, oh, what does a little bit mean? So there's a lot of vagueness around rehab in that way. So I totally get what you mean, that this kind of idea of risk, and it probably leaks over into what you're saying about business. So what I wanted to just pick up on as well, just because you're the type of person you are, and you've described, you know, we're kind of getting to know who you are now. What people do you need? Because like, there's going to be people like you who are driving that kind of ideas to be able to kind of, you know, think of this stuff and think outside the box, and want to kind of get better at what you're doing. And we need those type of people, absolutely. But there's probably people listening, like you said, who like to be safe and who like the safety side of things. It's a bit like it's like accountants, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like they're really important. We need accountants. They do a really good job. And they rail us in a little bit, but you need also people who can push things and say, well, actually, we can spend this money, and we need to invest here. Accountants going, don't do that. That's not going to be great for there. And you're like going, shut up, I'm going to take the risk, you know? So you got that idea. So what kind of people do you need around you, do you think, that's important to keep you kind of working well, to be able to take the best out of you, but also rein you in when you need? How would you describe those people? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think there's two aspects there that I'm going to kind of pick up on.
Yeah.
I historically have probably, and this slightly alludes to, I think, an aspect in our profession as well, is kind of subjectivity, gut feeling, experience. And that is because, if we're honest, we haven't had data, we haven't had objectivity, we haven't had benchmarks, we haven't had normative that is kind of consistently used, that allows progress or outcomes. So you do have to rely quite heavy on intuition, I would say, in physio. Would you agree with that, just out of interest?
No, I think, yeah, no, yeah, I do. I like, if you just even look at strength data, normative data around that, like at most clinics, getting better, but most places around the country don't have even ways of measuring force.
Yeah.
For
so
example.
That is changing. And
Yeah.
but that's been quite eye-opening for me, from the clinical involvement that I still have, but also how that then feeds into business and commercial. So now the data is becoming much more important to me. Not to get away from intuition, but it's like, what does that actually mean? What does the context of that mean? What does it mean in comparison to previous forecasting? So data and objectivity. I need people that will show me that, because I'm not going to be the one that creates that, also, because that's details. And so it's like readable data that I can then use and be insightful. And then I do need people to question. I love questions generally. So I need people that will answer my questions. There is definitely no stupid questions. And I know that's like a common saying, but it really, really is the case. I can give an example of, we changed some phone systems recently at the physio business that I'm involved with, and and a box hadn't been ticked that meant that people ringing could hear a ringtone. So when the phone was ringing, all they had was a dead line, and people were putting the phone down. We were like, we're getting loads of dropped calls. What's going on here? And it was literally that a tick box hadn't been ticked so that if you rang a phone, you could hear. So it's silly things like that. We were like, can we just check that there is a ringtone on this line? And they were like, oh no, we hadn't ticked that box. So what I'm saying is that literally there has to be and I know this gets thrown around as psychological safety, and you can there has to be an environment where you can ask questions.
Yeah.
And those need to be able to be received. And there has to be I need an environment where people ask me questions, because I can run off with ideas. And so I need to be kind of pulled back and checked in with as well. I also, on a personal level, need lots of communication. So either it's not around like feedback in specifically, but it's communication. So are things going well? Are things going bad? What does that look like? Where are we going next? Like, I do need like a thread of communication that is pretty consistent, because otherwise I think the worst thing you can do is be in the echo chamber of your head sometimes, and thinking things through. So I know that I'm the best out of me, and I think I also get the best out of other people is when there's lots of communication going on. And definitely, I mean, I've had experiences recently where that's fallen down and people start creating their own narrative. They're going off in rabbit holes. There's Chinese whispers. So yeah, lots and lots of communication is really key.
Great. Right. Okay. Brilliant. Because I definitely want to explore that a little bit more. A couple of things you mentioned, like developing a safe, collaborative environment culture, if you want to put as many buzzwords in there as possible. But that's what you're describing there. How do you create that? Either if someone's listening, how do you think and obviously we're just taking your opinion on this, but what do you do to set out that? Like, if someone's going to set up a group or is involved in a group, and obviously there's going to be many different personalities in there, what do you think is a good way to improve you've even to further on those communication things? You said you like this communication, but like, is that text messages every day? Is that phone calls? Is that meetings? What do they look like? Could you go into some details around that, maybe just in your experience?
And it will very much be my experience, because I would not say I'm an expert on culture or transformational change or aspects around that. What I see has worked well is managing expectations, setting boundaries, having clear outcomes. Like, why do you even have that communication? What is it trying to achieve? You gave an example of a group. Well, what's the purpose of the group? What are we here for? Why do we exist? Why are we in a group together? What are we trying to do? How frequent is that communication? So there's aspects around kind of like setting the rules to start off with, or setting the boundaries. And that then allows people to manage expectations. I have always, I think this changes because people change, but I have always had a bit of belief of like, treat people how you want to be treated yourself. And the aspect of that is like, basically, don't be a dick. Like, so we on a really, really basic level, like, and this may resonate with some people, 24-hour cancellation policy on appointments. That's like, you have to have a policy on that. Of course you do. But if someone calls us up and they're a long-standing patient, or we want them to be a long-standing patient, which ideally we should be looking for relationships with people going forward, and they are distraught on the phone, or they're having to rush off because their child is unwell at school and they've got to go pick them up now. Like, that's human. Like, there's got to be a human element to aspects as well. And I know that becomes more challenging when you scale things, and there needs to be consistency, but there is an element of like, how would you want to be treated yourself? And that's also a challenge as we go into more of like an AI automated kind of world and technology. The computer says no is going to come up more and more as we go forward. So making sure that the parameters are kind of set to start off with is an aspect of that. And the parameters around technology are usually set by humans. That's the point. So have we got the best humans kind of involved in those aspects, and are we at our best when we're setting this up, and can it be checked by someone else, and so that there isn't biases in there. There's a great book, if you haven't ever read it, called Noise, and it's all around human bias, and there's some really, really interesting stats around the differences in, or the variability in healthcare delivery, and some of it, and this also, I think, a big aspect in Noise is around like justice in the criminal system as well, and the difference between someone's like an outcome, be it health related or justice related, that happens pre-lunch when someone's hungry compared to after lunch when someone's being fed, is massive. So there is probably an element of self-awareness there of, am I turning up in my best way to be the best for other people? And if not, do I either need to communicate that? Do I need to reschedule whatever is going on? So I've kind of gone on a bit of a tangent there, but I think there's so many different aspects to it. It's just really considered thought, and how do you sense check that with other people as well?
No, it's brilliant, Nick. And I know I've done many rants like that, but actually when listening to it, again, there was so many things in there I resonate with. And I'm going to just kind of pick on a story as well that's nearly perfect for what you just said. And it links back to what we said about being a flexible, or in my case, a bamboo therapist, that idea that when you said about the 24-hour appointment, it's like this was planned. So literally about 3 weeks ago, so I'm lucky enough at the moment, I'm having there's a 3 or 4 week waiting list to see me. So appointments are good, and I'm filling in my appointment diary, and that keeps that ticking over, and I'm happy with that. But what happened suddenly was that there was a whole bunch of cancellations happening, and what happened, I think something else was going on in my life, something personal. So my psychology was a bit affected, and then I got 2 cancellations, and one was 5 minutes before the appointment. So it comes through on the email. So I have one earlier on, and the appointment earlier on, again, is these are 2 patients who I have seen a few times that are normally, they are lovely, right? So that it does matter as well. They don't take the mickey. They've come, they're on board. They're very, they're good patients from that perspective. It's not like someone who's just constantly canceling or anything. So it was very unusual, but my psyche at the time was, I'm quite stressed by stuff, and now I've had a double cancellation, which is a double loss of earnings on that, which does matter. I work by myself, so it's not, in that case, that does affect me. So then I'm like going, right, and I couldn't, at the time, I had to be careful. So I did at the time react probably in the wrong way, but I managed to, like what you were just saying, just so as an example for patients. So I did find out from the patient, I said, look, our 24-hour policy is like, it's 5 minutes before the appointment. I cannot fill that. If you told me this morning, I could probably fill it, but there's no way I can fill that now. And I didn't get an explanation. And then I actually hadn't seen a message he had sent me. So there's another human error here. I see the message he'd been into hospital. And then, so therefore, that carries another little thing of, right, okay, so this guy's really been through a bit of a tough time. I've already sent the message about the 24-hour cancellation policy. And then he's been really nice back and said, yeah, I've paid that. And then I've gone, okay, that's great that he's done that. He's been respectful, etc. And then I've realized the situation, and then sat back and just went, look, the next session, you don't have to pay for it. You just come to the next session. And we worked it out. And he came in, and then he did a nice thing on social media for me afterwards. But it was just this whole idea I got hijacked by my psychology of something. I didn't look at the bigger picture. I didn't really bounce it off anyone. And then I had to kind of calm it down and then rescue the situation. And it was just interesting the way, just everything you just said in there is all these biases, all these stresses affect our decisions. And I have to sometimes realize that I should have really said it to my wife, who would have went, calm down, Andrew. You know what I mean? Stop panic. She would have given me a perspective, but I didn't. I just was like, I can't deal with this right now, and reacted poorly and made this decision. And like you said, sometimes you come in one day and it's just not the right day. How do you think about your communication with other people so they're aware of that? You mentioned that really good study about the Israeli judges and the food, even eating food changes it and everything. So yeah, there's great stuff. Were you going to say something there?
Yeah, I over the years, I've probably been really bad at boundaries and really bad at I'm a people pleaser by heart, and I find saying no to people hard, but it has got better. Like, so the more, like everything, I suppose reps matter, and so the more you do practice it, and if you when you identify it as something that you struggle with, actually addressing it and not addressing the elephant in the room kind of thing. So and that's probably where, I know you asked me kind of coaching or mentorship. I really didn't engage with mentorship, I think, early enough in your career. And mentorship can be formal, it can be informal. But when I loved going into private practice, but I went in self-employed when I was kind of 26 and worked pretty independently, even though I was with organizations. But I didn't really have any accountability for quite a long time. And I do think, like, try to see, even though everyone craves autonomy and we are an autonomous profession, there's a difference between autonomy, especially clinical autonomy, and professional development, which then falls into accountability and someone asking you those difficult questions that are around how you behave and your default practices. And like, I'm not trying to say that anyone has it perfect, but I think just some awareness of what your default or what you do find as your comfort and why you do, and trying to explore that and be curious about it, is really, really, really useful, well spent time. One thing I did was this, if no one's ever done it, it's called the Spotlight Profile. And I do know there's practitioners that offer it as part of kind of like coaching as well. But have any of those kind of awareness tools where you do like Myers-Briggs or Spotlight or any of those to understand yourself better. It can be a real like mirror in the face, and you're like, oh yeah, I do that. And what does that mean? So it's not just accepting things at face value. So it's not just, it goes back to a lot of things that we've talked through, really. It's not just saying this is how it is. Well, why is it like that? Ask the question. And that goes into so many aspects of both clinical and business. Of, it's not that the information is just the starting point, and then there's like layers and layers of questions underneath that to really understand the context and what it really means, and what even to do with it. Because if you've just got that first bit of information, that initial starting point, you shouldn't really be making a decision based on that. You need multiple information points to then get the right answer, or what may be the right answer to something to try. But if you've only got one perspective or one point of information, you're really, really limited in what that decision making process will be.
Yeah, brilliant. There's so much crossover with patients, dealing with patients, and Andy Hosgood, a friend of ours both, we talk about that. So many crossovers with that accountability, patients having accountability, and why you don't always have to do things to people or show things or exercise. You can just get people to go, right, where are you at with what you said you were going to do? Like that, and people kind of think that's so valuable. It's unbelievable. I don't think as a therapy profession we nail into that enough. People really need that. Accountability is huge. It boosts commitment by about 70% when you do it. But people don't sometimes know that's what they need. And I think what you're talking about, this self-awareness, which is something I discuss with lots of people all the time. It's like, what drives me to try and do stuff? And I can safely say in the last 10 years, by reading more, if you want to call them self-development or communication or psychology books, is being the best thing I've ever done with regards to getting better as a therapist, but also in anything else I'm doing. And it was kind of scary at the start. But my question to you then, I suppose, is, and this is the thing I always kind of do, how do we get people who are a bit scared or not quite sure, they're nearly in ignorance or bliss or wherever that, it's that stages of change, they're not quite sure they need to do something, but how do we encourage people to become that? What's the first steps? I know you said about the spotlight, and I think that's a good start for people, but how would you encourage your staff, even like when you employ people, obviously, do you do anything around that to say, look, whatever about your physical skills or your ability, your knowledge around therapy, how do you get better as somebody who's going to develop the human? Do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, I don't think I've been great historically at recruitment. But the one thing that I do is I'm not really interested in what someone's done, and this feeds into I'm not as interested anymore about what people do therapeutically wise. I'm more interested in how they do it, and I'm more interested in, and that comes into kind of the people side. I'm more interested in how their career is looked like. So have they done something a bit different? How are they documenting that? How are they showing it that? How are they showing a different kind of thought perspective on something? So it's more around kind of less, I suppose, around the what, but more about the how. And that would probably be like, that would possibly be my kind of main thought of, if you were having to ask or challenge or have that conversation with someone as a starting point, let's put aside what's happened and what that looks like, or even what you're doing. How are you doing it, and why are you doing it, are probably kind of the other questions of it. So it's probably just taking something a stage on, and that quite often with any kind of problems or challenges that come up from a leadership or a management perspective, tell me what happened. Yeah, okay, that's fine. But why? What was the context? What's everything around it? Like, usually that's such a small part of it. It's everything else that I look at to then be able to go, what's the decision that we're going to make out of the back of this? So yeah, it's really understanding that kind of context. And that starting point for people would be that second question. So it's not just that piece of information, but it's what else? What else can we add to that, and what else can we do with that? So and that comes into what you were talking about, the self-awareness and that curiosity. Like, have a second question. What would that be? So yeah, I think sometimes, like, I think back to kind of physio days and be like, oh, does it hurt when you walk down the stairs? Yes. Okay, well, that's not so. Like, what does that mean? Like, so there has to be more. There has to be more depth to things, for it to have kind of relevancy and for it to be useful information.
Yeah, it's the exploration, isn't it, of the person, and then I suppose then it's that physio listening, or not physio, any therapist listening to this, doesn't matter who you are, and it doesn't really matter what area of work you're in. Again, it's the reflection and exploration into to what you are as a person, what you're doing, and then trying to then maybe fit in with other people who are like-minded in that thought, have conversations in that group. Again, it's going back to our ripple effect of, maybe you just need to develop a little network of people to start in your journey to getting a bit more kind of flexible, or other words, like curious, I suppose, is again, comes back to that great question. So I think if anyone was listening, I think that's it's the amount of times I speak to people who have been quite successful or very successful, whatever, in their career, or happy and content with what they do. I think that's even better. They don't have to have loads of money or loads of businesses, but they all seem to be quite content about what they're doing and quite excited, or quite like, yeah, you like, you can tell from you that what you're doing is excites you. You're like, right, what's the next thing? What, you enjoy this process. And I think, I suppose, if you're sitting there going, I don't enjoy the process of my work, it's there available to you if you just maybe ask some questions, I suppose, is what you're saying.
Or change the, like, I really do believe in the world of choice. And I'm not saying that from kind of like a flippant privilege kind of position or anything like that, but we do have choices. And if you like, you can choose. So if you're not happy in that role, we'll change it. If you're not happy in that environment, we'll change it. Like, I do believe in choice. And I think when that, from a mindset perspective, if you don't think you have any choices, I know that can be a really sad and not a great place to be, but that, like, there will be something that probably can be changed. So we need to kind of explore that in some way. But the other aspect that you're alluding there to around choice is, you have to want it in some way, or you have to and I think this is a really, really key point with some people that are reaching out to me on kind of LinkedIn and that I'm starting to kind of mentor, is transferable skills is a massive aspect. So if you don't like, you may have trained as a physio, but your identity is not tied to being a physio. And if there isn't a role that you're finding, or the systems aren't the way that you thought they were going to be, or you can't align to an organization in what they want, well, you've still got a huge amount of transferable skills. It's not wasted, because they're human skills and they're personal skills and they're development skills, and they can be utilized in different ways, still within kind of either healthcare as a whole market. So you don't have to be the practitioner. So I think it's just people knowing that there's choice, and that there's a bigger world than the NHS. There's a bigger world than an identity of a profession, and that you are a human with these transferable skills that can be used in lots of different ways. And I think when you open yourself to that creates possibilities, and that creates opportunities, and that also helps with choice.
Yeah, and I think obviously you offer these kind of services from the point, or the kind of idea of exploring the world of getting coached or getting an experience even, and you don't need to you don't need to spend an awful lot of money. You can reach out to people. They just need again, when I've been coached, it's the simplest of questions, or when I've coached people and they've said to me, was when you asked me that question, I went, oh right, yeah. And they're never like, oh, what's the square root of 4,400? It's usually just like stuff like, what do you really want? What's going to make you content? Just using, for example, they're not usually that difficult, the question, but the person steps back and goes, I don't know why I do that. No, I don't really ask myself that question. And then just sitting there and exploring that simple question to start with is you can get that quite free. And I suppose from chatting to you and chatting to lots of other people who have been successful in this space, is just getting comfortable with going to somebody and going, right, I don't have to chat about me as a therapist, isn't the knowledge around being a therapist. It's actually, what am I as a human? How happy am I and how content I am in my job? Because if you are, and I can tell, for example, like I just said about how I managed that patient there a couple of weeks ago, when I'm flying in myself and content, I'm brilliant with patients. Like I knew today was a short day. I'm going to do this with you. I had 2 patients this morning, and I'm going to drive to London now, right? So I knew when I came in this morning, it's weird. When you don't have 10 patients in a row, I've got more energy. It's like I've got all the energy, but I've only got 2 patients. And I know I've got, you know what I mean? So I'm like, and I'm coffeeed up. And I know it for a fact that they will get better out of me because I haven't got the rest of the day to get through. And that's just being a human, isn't it? You just sometimes have to have that idea of, right. And I know I was in top form today. I was in good form. I felt it. I felt content. And therefore my communication, I could feel, was natural and more on point. I don't know if you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think I don't think we'll have time to explore this fully, but there's a big aspect about what we do, or what has been delivered under, and let's say MSK to keep it simple, has been like brought down into a very automated, kind of simplistic, mechanistic kind of way. And the aspect of that is then you've got companies like Hinge Health, Sword Health, they're probably going to IPO in 2025. And there's a digital kind of AI-based MSK services. So the other people, what I'm getting at here is that finance houses, investment committees, they can look at a service from the external and they can go, oh, well, that can all be automated. Because a large majority of it has been brought down into a very simplistic, like potentially like a sheet of exercises, or a very unpersonalized kind of way. But what we do know, and for some people that will work, like on scale, some people do need a elevated self-management tool of some kind.
Yeah.
But there are also then like a body of people who need a very human, heavy touch point, coaching aspects, behavioral change, a communication part, and that can't be, that's a really kind of human-centered aspect of it. And so we have got this variability in how people are managed. We've got health is highly complex. So I haven't got kind of like a straight answer to this, but I'm just saying there's lots of lots of parts playing around in that. And I think sometimes the worst thing we can do is generalize everything together of healthcare or MSK. But I do think there should be a focus towards like outcomes and what's the impact of that is delivered, and does it actually get someone back to work, or does it get them running, which has a longer term, like we do need to start to work towards like what is the outcome of that rather than what is the thing that we do with someone, because that we have to be able to measure the value and the return of what we do, otherwise it will continue to be undervalued.
That's a really good way to end this, because because I know you've got to go. But yeah, I was going to ask you another question, but I think actually what you're saying is that idea is to summarize that communication, that flexibility, knowing when certain things are really good and knowing when certain things are actually need to be different, like a coaching perspective, like you just said. And then if we can measure that, we can then say, oh, actually, you know what? There's a bunch of people that will do well from automated stuff. Brilliant. You can do that. And then here is where we need to focus our coaching, our human perspective on these people. And the way we know that is because we've measured, we've got information, we've got that data. So it's marrying those two worlds, which I think is a great way to summarize.
Yeah.
Unless you've got another point. Yeah.
Well, I've got one last point, and the reason, and it leads on to this, is probably why I've continued to kind of like challenge myself in different roles, from practitioner to kind of business owner to doing an MBA to having an interest in like investing and the conversations that kind of happen, because I do believe like the clinical perspective that we can give at different points is really, so what I would encourage is people to be ambitious about what their ceiling is. So your ceiling, I don't believe as a practitioner, is like a what used to be in my day, and this shows how out of date I am, is like an ESP or an advanced practitioner. Like it could be, that may be all, but I would say be curious and be interested about what's happening at the decision tables or at the investment tables, because it will directly influence how you can deliver your service or what that looks like. So it's like you have to have an interest in the other decision makers and what's going on to then know. So it's not like, oh, they've cut our budget. Where it's like, well, why have they cut their budget? It's because you can't demonstrate the impact that you're having, and therefore it's going somewhere else. Or as a really, like, don't quote me on that kind of as an example, but have an interest in why that decision's being made and who's making that decision and what their priorities are, because then you understand the bigger picture. So that's kind of probably my leaving of like, it doesn't just end with your service delivery either. And that's not trying to overwhelm people. But if you understand like the bigger stakeholder picture and the ecosystems that services are delivered in, and the different priorities that people have to balance and what they're being motivated by or even measured on, then you get to understand why it impacts further down a chain. So it's like keep pushing to understand those bigger conversations as well.
It comes back to that word curious again, isn't it?
It does. It does.
That's brilliant, Nick. Thanks a million for the chat.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Teacup. If you liked it, tell all your friends. If you didn't, well, maybe you'll like the next one. Go to procareeducation.com or Procare Education on Instagram for more information on courses and the Bamboo Project. And remember, always be sound and not a dickhead.